This crowd rises to its feet. Vaccaro slammed it home. Garland left wing, free ball. Perfect! Garland went to the lane, lobbed to Mobley. Pow! And Allen blocked the shot at the rim. Pow! With the left hand and a foul.
Welcome to the Chase Down Podcast, part of the Cavs media family. I'm your host, Justin Rowan. The Chase Down is presented by Fubo, the official streaming partner of the Cavs. Watch over 350 channels of live sports and TV, including Bally Sports Ohio, without cable. There's no cost and no commitment. Try for free at FuboTV.com/Cavs. The Cleveland Cavaliers lost an entertaining, but close finish against the Boston Celtics. Joining me today is my co-host Carter Rodriguez, who is going to be a little more accurate than I am.
Well, who's to say? I tweeted a wrong free throw stat immediately after the game, so no one's perfect here, Justin.
No, they're not. But we brought in a guest today to help us out, to help keep us a little more perfect. From CLNS Boston, it is our friend Bobby Manniung. Bobby, how you doing, buddy?
You got to get that one right.
Dude,
good.
Acronyms.
Good to be back. Yeah. Good to see these teams for a couple of games together. We were talking about it a little bit earlier, Justin, the pros and cons of this. I love it. I love that we can do stuff like this in between, almost like a playoff series, and talk about these teams a little more in depth rather than going on to the next team on a back-to-back or whatever it is that you see throughout the year. So I love that they mix these in, but as you guys know, you lose Mobley, you potentially lose both these, and there goes your seeding and tiebreaker and all that. So I get the people who don't like it for that reason.
Oh, I don't think any Cavs fans are super worried about tiebreakers right now. I think they just like to get out of the play-in.
we are in full playoffs version right now. Yeah, I do like these matchups. Like I really...
That was a sneaky good playoffs.
Thank you.
You really snuck it in.
Since the NBA did this to kind of cut down on travel, I do like these kind of back-to-back games in the same city. I like that it gives teams the opportunity to game plan for the same team multiple times in a row. I think for young teams like the Cavaliers who don't have tons of playoff experience, it's a good kind of example of being able to game plan for these teams. But like you said, the one obvious downside is if you do have an injury that carries over, it can be detrimental. And looking at the two kind of opportunities where the Cavs have played the same team in a row, both of them have been situations where they're missing guys. They had a back-to-back against the Knicks without Garland and Allen. Missed LeVert for the first one of those games, managed to go into the Garden and steal the second one. So hopefully they can go into the Garden tomorrow and steal one. But I do like these opportunities. And obviously Boston is a big measuring stick game. It's a game that I think it's a safe bet that the Cavs wouldn't be favored, even if they were fully healthy. But these teams always seem to have really entertaining games every time they play.
Yeah, and I thought last night was too for most of the game. The beginning wasn't great for Boston. The end wasn't great for Cleveland, but in between, it's shot for shot. The third quarter, sensational, 35-32. Both teams trading shots on both ends, exposing weaknesses for each other, I thought, in Boston's ability to attack some of the Cleveland wings and guards and such, and the Cavs pulling up over the drop there that the Celtics employ. And you talk about the adjustments and the back and forth potential in these series as well. The Celtics adjusted in the fourth and started switching more and putting Porzingis out in the perimeter to combat some of the pull-up jumpers that the Cavs were able to hit over them. So that was a big factor in the game. Porzingis, great late. He's a big difference in this matchup this year. Of course, no Mobley, so you can't get a full sense of the Cavs, as you guys haven't for pretty much the whole year here. But another good game overall, I thought, here, and it should be another good one tomorrow. I guess Brown's questionable now, so maybe he's out of the mix after spraining his ankle in this one, or rolling it.
That would feel a little more fair.
Yeah.
Take it easy, Jalen.
Big cosmic balancing the scales. It's just I really love this matchup. I do too. I loved all their games last year, even though I think, if I recall correctly, Boston really ran away with one of them later in the year. But obviously there were those two really, really fun ones to start with the Cavs.
Yeah, the Grant Williams game.
Yeah. So, I just feel like these two teams kind of challenge each other really, really well. I think Darius in particular has a lot of fun in this matchup. For whatever reason, he's the one archetype that I feel like they kind of have at least last year had a little bit of trouble with, and I was super interested to see about how the Drew White pairing would kind of change that as much as it might, and I still thought he was able to get into the paint pretty darn comfortably in this one. And then the defensive chess match is just really cool. I think Dean Wade does as good of a job on Tatum as just about any big wing defender in the league. And I feel like the Cavs shell defense just does a nice job of baiting Boston into the kinds of pull-up threes that they kind of settle for at their worst. Do you agree with that?
Definitely. And early on, they didn't have the three-pointer at their disposal. I think they started 0 for 6. They fall behind. And I started to get worried right there that the Celtics just didn't have it in this game and that the Cavs were going to expand that lead even more, especially the way Cleveland was shooting on the other end of the floor to start this game. That was a big difference early. But the Celtics figured it out pretty quickly. And you see the evolution of Tatum and Brown. They both stayed pretty aggressive in terms of attacking the rim in this one. That's where you miss Mobley. They both, especially Brown early, finished tough shots inside. 26 free throws, very uncharacteristic of the Celtics in this one too. As you mentioned, they do settle for threes quite a bit, but this was probably their strongest night in getting to the line, and of course hitting all of them as well all year. So
unbelievable.
You don't see that often.
When they got to their 19th in a row, early fourth quarter, I was like, they're not going to miss tonight. They're just not going to.
And that's another step for Boston. They've needed to start implementing that to their offense on nights where they're not as great from three. And they ended this one pretty strong, I think 40% from three. So both teams had it going in that area. And the difference was Brown's tough finishes, 9 free throws for Tatum. I believe Porzingis had 9 as well. So that was I thought pretty much the difference in the game there, their ability to get to the line, especially against a tough back line like Allen and some of the wing defenders you have there and Wade and others.
Yeah, something that I thought was interesting about this matchup, and one of the spots where I kind of didn't expect to be missing Mobley, but I really do think the Cavs were, is anytime the Celtics could run and force mismatches off of their running. Even when they sprinted into a half court set, but a guy like George Niang got caught on Porzingis, or Jarrett got caught up on Tatum, just matching up in semi transition. I thought they really missed Evan in those moments, because whenever Jarrett did get, obviously Porzingis did not have a good game. He went 5 of 16 from the field, but he ends up with 21 points because he gets to the line 9 times. And I think a big part of that was really the fact that I thought Boston just got a lot smarter about getting him mismatches in that fourth quarter. And when the 3-point shooting is so potent at the 3 and the 4, they didn't play a lot of Horford. Did they play a single Horford Porzingis minute in that entire game?
Together? No.
I don't think so.
They did a little bench Cornette Horford thing, but not much double big at all.
I'll tell you what, every time Luke Cornett's on the floor, I'm throwing a party. But
Come on.
Yeah, I mean, just comparatively. But with a guy like Tatum at the 4, if Jarrett gets pulled into a switch or gets caught with him in transition, he can't do the tag out back to Porzingis. And I thought Boston really found something in the fourth quarter, just finding ways to isolate him, and then everything would kind of break down around him.
Yeah, they're pretty methodical with the offense this year, and that's why Justin and I talked a little bit about Joe coming into this, and he's obviously a much maligned figure of the past year and change here, given some of the struggles they've had in big spots. But I feel like he has a pulse on this offense. He knows what's important for them. He's constantly stressing attacking the mismatches, doing all the little things that help the offense on off shooting nights, like offensive rebounding. They've implemented post-ups this year with Porzingis and others, and that showed in this game. I felt like they were able to do all those little things that helped enhance the offense early when the shooting wasn't there, and then when they were able to get to some of the ball movement later, knock down threes, find good shots, get to the line, and do all those little things that separated them late in this game. I was stunned. Justin said that this was the best offensive game Cleveland's
This was
had
the
all year.
best offensive performance against Boston all year. The Cavs put up a 116.5 offensive rating against Boston. It was the most any team has in a matchup against the Celtics.
That's crazy.
Yeah, like,
And it looked like
that's
it.
a crazy low number too. Like that's like for a worst offensive performance or defensive performance of the year. Like that's unbelievable.
That's
and
bananas.
I just feel like Porzingis has been such a difference maker for Boston. And I've really, like, I had questions about that going into this year, where I was like, is he going to be happy with this role? Is he like, he wasn't that happy next to Luka? And we talked about it before on your show, Bobby, but like, these guys aren't poorly written TV characters. Like, people learn from their experiences, they learn from their failures, they grow as people, and he just seems like such a more mature player. And I was impressed too, because the Cavs prior to this stretch, they had a few days at home where they were able to have a few practices in a row, and the things that they said that they were really working on was attacking drop defense, as well as having the counters available for when teams trap. And Boston does a lot of drop with Porzingis, and the Cavs actually kind of forced them out of that late. Like, Garland did such a good job against the drop, getting those pull-up jumpers, that Porzingis actually started to, come out a little bit more to the perimeter. And the fact that he has that kind of defensive versatility and is able to impact the game in that way is really, really impressive. And,
did you notice they pulled the old Rob Williams in the fourth quarter, though? They started putting him on Okoro on a few possessions.
Yeah.
And basically it's just like, and that's another spot where you miss having no Evan, because Jarrett's really your only legit role guy on the roster here. So like, I guess you can take Isaac Okoro and bring him up to go screen with Porzingis in a drop, but you're just not yielding the same advantage you would otherwise. And I think they were correctly betting that, like, hey, whether it's Dean, whether it's Isaac, like, I'm going to be able to recover to get back to those guys, whether they attack the rim, if they get the outlet or not. And I think that was a nice little chess move from Joe. I thought the Celtics made a lot of nice little chess moves like that in that game, where, like, it just kind of felt like they had a few more, with Mobley not available, just kind of felt like they had a few more tools in their bag than the Cavs coaching staff did.
Well, when you have this personnel, it makes it a little bit easier,
Yeah.
Obviously. It's incredible what they have in the starting lineup there. I'd say it's probably the best starting lineup in the league.
It is. You don't have to be humble with it.
Yeah.
It is. And the bench guys are playing well too, right? Like,
That blows
they've got
my
they've got a legitimate rotation here.
They've been consistent. I've talked to them a lot all year, and the big thing, they struggled early. They had a game, when the bench comes in up 30 or whatever, and they really blew it. I forget what game it was off the top of my head, but they had a full film session with that bench crew after, and ever since then, they've been pretty motivated, connected. It was a really good group last year for them, guys who've played a lot together in Cornette and Pritchard and Hauser and them, who've been in the organization for a handful of years now. So they play well together, and they're not the best individual talents, but they do little things. They play well and connected together, and they mix in well with the starters. Now, I do think the biggest issue on this team probably still is the groups that have Brown running that group rather than Tatum out there. Still going to have to stagger Tatum a lot more in that group than you would love to, minutes wise, but he makes it work. He's able to sustain through those minutes, and the bench overall has been rock solid, I feel like, to start this year. So that was one of their bigger concerns. They've answered that. Porzingis, you listed all the questions you have about him. I feel like he's answered pretty much every one. The health's the big one still with him long term, but in terms of when he's available, it doesn't look like he has many weaknesses out there, and he's someone who accentuates the two stars so well. If you were listing off all the guys that you said coming into this year would have finally solved this puzzle, I think it would have taken a little while for people to get to Porzingis, just because of the perception, the injuries, being lost in Dallas there for a little bit, and then playing well in Washington.
It would have taken me a very long time.
Yeah,
he just seems like a guy that you would otherwise need to be, like, to be at his best, you would kind of be needing to feature. And it feels like even though he got 16 shots and 9 free throw attempts in this game, I didn't get the impression that, like, they were going out of their way to get him touches as much as just, like, those perimeter players, especially Tatum and Brown, have such gravity as shooters and as on-ball creators that, all he has to do is kind of drift lazily towards the rim, and he's always going to have a step on someone. And, when you're 7'3" and have touch, like, a step on something's really all you need. And like, I just don't know if he's ever had that step consistently because of his he he can be the third guy in an action and end up with 15 to 20 shots a game.
It's a great story. It is, and that's been my favorite part of
I don't
covering
like
the
it, but you know.
Well, this isn't how you expected his
No.
career to pan out, because he had the promise. He was that kind of a prospect to play at this level and impact the game at this level, but it went haywire in New York. It went really poorly in Dallas. Not the best two organizations to end up on, of course, but
I like the slander.
but he makes it out of there, finds himself again. I think he talked early in the preseason about looking in the mirror at a certain point about how bad of a post player he was. And you see in this game again how deadly he is in there. I think statistically still the best post player in the league to start this year. The defense has come a long way. And, you look at who he was with the Knicks. He was flying all over the court. He was a very athletic presence out there, and injuries and other things have kind of taken that away from him. But he's added all the skills to counteract that. And I feel like he looks even better now coming out the other side, despite some of those physical limitations he might have. So it's been great to watch. He's an interesting guy to cover. He's funny, he's witty, he's really easygoing, it looks like. With this group, you mentioned the usage, Carter. That was one of my biggest questions coming in this year. Was this guy who was such a featured player in those other stops be able to take a back seat? And he has no problem with it. He's like, I take 8-9 shots. Who cares if we win? All our stats are going to go down this year. Whatever, we're trying to win. Like, it is not even, I asked him at the opening press conference, and I was shocked by how little he seemed to have thought about it. Like, it was just like, yeah, I'm going to a great team. I don't care what the stats are. I don't care what the shot totals are. And that's how he's played so far.
Yeah, and I love situations like that. Like, I think we talk about the league a little two-dimensional, and a guy finding that right moment in his career where he's reached his own levels of maturity in order to embrace this role. And Boston, who had a lot of talent, but sometimes would be volatile in terms of fit in the hierarchy within the team. I think it's a really good story. And taking it back to this matchup, like, it was really nice to see Jared Allen kind of bounce back in the way that he has, because he had three rough games in a row. And it just seems like this season he really has gotten up for these matchups against the best centers in the league. He was terrific against Jokic. He was terrific against Embiid, holding Porzingis to 5 of 16 shooting, and switching on to Tatum at times.
2 points in the first half. Yeah.
Yeah, like he did a really good job making him work, which is what you want. And
even in the second half, Porzingis' damage, I think, mostly came on other guys.
Yeah, and came, getting to the free throw line and stuff like that. And even the fact that Jared, he contributed 5 assists as well, right? Like, normally that's something that Mobley does, where he's that outlet against traps and stuff like that. He gives you that short roll playmaking. So for Jared to have such a great game from a playmaking standpoint, getting 5 stocks as well in this game, like, he just did a lot of things, and it was nice to see him bounce back in that way. Maybe he just doesn't get up for Goga Batase. Like, that, maybe that's what we got going on here.
Listen, I don't know if I would either. Like, he just bang you up a little bit.
Goga's been
nice,
having a nice little season.
There's no glory to be won against Goga Batase. I pivoting back. First off, I will say I agree. I thought Jared had a really great game in this one. A little bit of a low rebounding total, but not in a way I thought was particularly problematic. And there
was also a lot of those, like, going back and rewatching it today. Like, there was a lot of times where he was kind of tipping it out to teammates, batting it off the board. Like, he was being really active, and they weren't out rebounded as a team.
You felt his presence in this game for sure on both ends.
Yeah, that's like that to me. That's the end result there, where you're not getting killed on second chance points.
Yeah, so I thought he had a really, really nice game. It just is a bummer Evan isn't here, because I think the Cavs only have so many lineups that can work against Boston's best lineups, and I think, you don't want to be too reductive and say the story of the game shows up in the plus minuses, but most of the Cavs starters were positive in this one, and you look at Niang minus 14 and 23, Okoro minus 15 in his 16, Thompson minus 11 in his 12, like. Niang specifically, it just feels like a really rough matchup for him, because Boston can be big and switchy and shooty, and like that's just like a Niang pick and pop is just not yielding you a ton. And then on the defensive end, he can't switch up on a Porzingis, like he's just too big. So like it just feels like the kind of like I feel like if this we talk a lot about how in most playoff series you're going to have at least one role player who just isn't going to be a fit in that series and isn't going to make it onto the floor after one or two games. This kind of feels to me like one of those matchups where Niang would just kind of slowly whittle his way out of the rotation. I think it's just a really, really tough matchup. And like, if Mobley was healthy, I think you just see Dean Wade get those 23 to 30 minutes that Niang is getting. And I worry about this matchup with Mobley out yet again, because I just didn't see a lot of roads to them surviving bench minutes if Boston wasn't playing at least 3 bench players as well.
Yeah, and even with I'm not going to project or anything like that, but in general, I think this matchup, when you look at what the Celtics have, there's a real gap between these teams. And
right
the
now,
Cavs
for
played
sure,
great. They bridged it, well in this game. But and I've had this said to me, just talking about to people around the league over the last couple of years. Oh, the Celtics are so great. There's so much talent. This is one of the best teams in the league. And I know we watch this team night in, night out and nitpick them at a high level. That it doesn't always feel like that. But this year it feels like that watching them. Like they don't let opponents off the hook. They don't let mismatches defensively stay on the court. And they utilize all these guys' strengths and weaknesses so well. And it really is a credit to team building. It's tough to have this many guys who are two-way players on the floor that have so many different strengths in this game, in their games, and so few weaknesses. Because you do look at teams like Cleveland and teams all over the league. They have guys who might struggle defensively, but they're a shooting specialist or a rebounder like Thompson, and doesn't do a ton else. The Celtics have all these guys who dribble, screen, shoot, drive, defend, and they have them at every position. It's unbelievable watching this team. It's probably the most talented Celtics team I've watched in my life.
It's absolutely unbelievable.
That's
support.
a big
It's
statement.
almost as good as the support we get from Zoom. Support for this podcast and the following message comes from Zoom. 500,000 businesses connect using Zoom, a single platform for phone, chat, workspaces, events, apps, and video. Zoom enables real-time collaboration for teams around the globe. Zoom, how the world connects. I really needed to jump to the ad read there, because anytime I just hear totally unhinged but accurate glowing praise of the Boston Celtics,
just gotta get out. Pull the ripcord, baby.
Yeah, I need to be professional. I need to, separate sometimes the fan portions of my being, and I just needed that little bit of a buffer. But you're right. They look like the clear best team in the Eastern Conference to me. Milwaukee has looked uneven and has major questions, and Boston just doesn't have that. If they're healthy, it's going to be really hard for any team in the Eastern Conference to beat them. And there are gaps in terms of the Cavs roster compared to the Celtics, and obviously that becomes more pronounced without Evan Mobley. But Carter, I thought you were on the money where there isn't that second option you can go to. There isn't that huge wing that can kind of play in at the 4 and kind of replicate some of that. I fact checked you. Boston didn't blow out Cleveland at any point last year.
I thought there was one game that they really ran us off, but I can't remember.
We lost by 4 and we won 3 overtime games. So we were 3-1 against Boston last year. But it always seems to be a close matchup. I hope Thursday's a close matchup. But from my perspective, I'm coming away from these 2 losses against Orlando and Boston, teams that are combined 22-2 at home. And I'm feeling a lot better.
Heck of a road trip. Thanks.
Yeah,
thanks, league.
Heck of a back-to-back. And you know what? I want to give a little bit of credit to our Discord, because normally it's unhinged and awful. And I'm kidding. I love you all. But when the Cavs got out to that start, a lot of them smartly were like, hey, this is probably a rust situation, right? Where Boston hasn't played for a while. They're taking some ill-advised shots, ill-advised turnovers, that kind of stuff.
That start was awful. Yeah,
they're going to make a game of it, and I think it resembled what you would expect when one team has had a long time off, and the other team's coming off a road back-to-back, where the Cavs just kind of ran out of gas in the fourth quarter. But I'll be interested to see, what kind of adjustments are made. Do the Celtics go back to drop to start the game, and the Cavs once again have to shoot them out of it? But for me, looking at this season, the starting five has been a positive for the Cavs. But I think the biggest reason why the offense of that starting five isn't as good as it was last year, even with Isaac Okoro instead of Max Strus, comes down to guard play. Like I just have felt like Garland and Mitchell, whether it be injuries or just not finding a rhythm, they just haven't been themselves. But when I look at this recent stretch, they're looking like themselves again. The Cavs shot diet is looking like what we thought going into the year in preseason. And I just feel like they're very close to turning the corner. You look at the last 4 games, since Carter and I had a debate of whether or not they'd start taking more threes once they got healthy, they're averaging just about 40 threes per game over the last 4 games. And to me, that's a really encouraging sign.
Yeah, it does feel like, I don't know, like it kind of does help prove the theory that like this, the Cavs have not had a lot of games this year where Darius and Donovan have both played well. And we've kind of been waiting for it, and it's no surprise that in this one I thought they both had really nice games overall. Obviously, I thought Boston started figuring some things out late, but for the most part they were generating pretty clean looks, especially when they were on the floor together in this one, and had multiple outlets to kind of challenge Boston and kind of probe and find different angles to attack. And I don't know, man. It's hard. I kind of want to actually ask Bobby, because obviously this is one of the team. This is the worst Boston defensive performance of the year, and this Cavaliers offense has been pretty chuggy. I want to say there's like 22nd or 23rd in the half court this year, after being 10th in the half court last year per cleaning the glass. Like, what are your impressions of what that team is doing on what this Cavaliers team is doing on that side of the ball? Like, how much do you feel Strus is helping kind of loosen things up, or do you like what is your impression of that, of what you kind of saw in that game of the Cavs kind of at their best so far this year?
Yeah, Strus is gritty, and he comes from that Miami team that bothered the Celtics probably more than any other team over the last few seasons here. And I saw that carry over last night in a couple different moments. He didn't kill them, but he's knocked down shots. He got inside at one point. He like smashed his head or something off like a whole crowd of guys inside in there. And he's just.
Did they get a call there, Bobby?
I don't think they did they?
I do like, honestly, and sorry to cut you off, but I think this is one of the great things about when you play the same team twice in a row. I like that JB was doing a little bit of the campaigning, because you see that in a playoff series where it's like, hey, one team really we feel like they got the home whistle in the first game. Let's get
JB was mad after that Mitchell tech too.
I mean, that was ridiculous.
That was a terrible tech.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he earned it once he started clapping, but it was clearly not off of him. But I like the little gamesmanship. I like doing that to set up for the next game, that, hey, like, Cavs are 5th in attacks at the rim and Boston's 24th. Which team should be having significantly more free throws, or at least
you definitely do not see the Celtics shoot free throws like this. But in terms of the Cavs offense, they're well built to attack the Celtics defense. They're laid back. They're going to allow certain shots in that mid-range area that, frankly, some players in this league are comfortable taking. I know the math and all of that, and over the course of the season, it's going to pan out. But there are nights, there are games where those make sense. If the space is there, if you're comfortable taking them, I think it makes sense to take those. And that's what kept the Cavs in this game. I thought they did a great job of taking those in the third. Garland's speed really stands out, because obviously this is such a sturdy defensive backcourt for Boston. He was making those guys look slow at times and getting deep into the paint.
His stops and starts kind of bother. I feel like, like his change of speed and kind of gear shifting has kind of caused Boston trouble the past couple of years. I've cited it a billion times on this podcast, but I remember Grant Williams saying he was like the toughest cover for the Celtics in the league a couple of years ago. And obviously that's a bit hyperbolic probably, but like, I feel like that archetype they do not like playing against that kind of guy.
He's also had a lot of success against Drew too. Like, weirdly enough, like there was a game I think 2 years ago that people hung on to where his 3rd and 4 nights, but outside of that, like, he seems to have success. Not that Holiday's playing bad defense, but he's just such a herky-jerky and skilled player with the floaters and the pull-ups, and now he's finishing better at the rim. Like, he's just a really tough cover.
Yeah, and the Celtics can be a little rigid with how they guard. I think a lot of teams in the league, just because of the analytics, fall into this. Like, they don't really feel the need to take away that mid-range shot. And in a playoff setting, in a single game setting, that can hurt you. And it almost did hurt the Celtics here, how comfortably Mitchell and Garland were stepping into shots here. And they adjusted late. Thought it played a big role in the outcome of this game here. But I thought Atlanta did a great job of that last year against Boston once Trae Young got going.
Trae fits that archetype, right?
Like, I'm trying to think of some other teams. Those kind of teams give Boston issues. Just
even
because
Steph in the finals, right? Just like that,
Right,
that
he'll
stop
step
and
into
start,
those.
stop and
Yeah.
start, like that kind of change. Like, I feel like it's not like, Darius is an exceptional athlete. He's not like a Ja Morant or a De'Aaron Fox in terms of getting up and down the floor. It's the gear shifting and kind of these, especially guys like Drew or Marcus Smart in years past, who are these bulkier guys who kind of want to lean on you. Like, I feel like that is like kind of the perfect antithesis to them stylistically. Can I quickly make a little selfish rant to all basketball fans about the foul disparity?
What's that?
So, here's a pro tip. If you're on Twitter, you want to complain that the other team is shooting more free throws than you. The one stat I gotta stop seeing cited is we had double the points in the paint and we got outshot at the free throw line by 30. I'm like, yeah, of course you have more points in the paint. They were going to the line when they shot in the paint.
Right. Yeah.
Like, it's the worst evidence to prove that you're getting jobbed in the whole world. Because if they're drawing fouls every time they shoot a layup, they're getting no points in the paint.
Yeah, it doesn't count as a point in the paint.
So,
and that was even in this game, 34 points in the paint.
I saw it a few times on Twitter last night. I'm like, guys, I'm on your team here. I didn't like the free throw disparity either. We gotta you gotta look at like paint attempts or like look at the shot chart. But you can't look at points in the paint. Those are antithesis of one another.
Yeah, and honestly, I think some of it is also a product of like when Jaylen Brown or Jason Tatum are really attacking the rim, it's hard to defend those guys without fouling. And the Cavs would leave their feet a fair bit. And when Cleveland's putting pressure on the rim, it's usually the guards or it's the bigs. And bigs, you're typically allowed to a fair amount of contacts allowed both ways without whistles going, and guards don't always really get rewarded in those same ways. So I think the ways that these teams apply rim pressure had more to do than anything else when you look at that. But I just it was fun to see the Cavs actually outshoot Boston. They attempted and made more threes than the Celtics in a game. I don't think that happens very often. They did a good job. The fast break was even. They won points off of turnovers. Like, that's all the kind of stuff. You don't want to lose the possession battle against the Celtics because they're already so good offensively. And I thought for the second night of a back-to-back where, the betting line was minus 11.5 in favor of the Celtics.
That's an enormous line. I don't know if the Cavs were an 11.5 point dog at any point last year.
Dude, they are an 8.5 point underdog tomorrow. So they're
Celtics get some big lines at home. They do.
Wow, that makes sense. They have not lost there
until
yet.
You lose a game at home. That's going to happen. But it's frustrating because you want to feel like the Cavs are making momentum and trending in the right direction, and I really feel like they are. Like I was frankly like I was a little down and I was a little like almost getting pessimistic of when we're going to get over the hump, but once Garland and Mitchell start playing like this again, like good things just happen. And when you look at Carter cited that they're 23rd in terms of half court points per possession, but they're second in the Eastern Conference in terms of like shot quality in the half court. Like they're getting great looks in the half court. It's I think they're fifth overall and second in the Eastern Conference. Like they're ahead of Indy. And it's not just attempts at the rim because Indy takes just as many shots at the rim as Cleveland. So they're getting good looks. I think, when your two most prolific shooters in Garland and Mitchell are starting to take and make threes again, that's a really positive sign. And you look up and down the roster, there's not a single guy that is shooting at their career average when it comes to 3-point percentage. Strus is the closest. He's almost at 37%, but Garland's almost 4.5% below his career average. Mitchell's 2% below. Niang's 4%. Wade 2%. LeVert 3%. Okoro 1%. Like up and down the roster, you would think that, hey, this is a team that's going to continue to generate these good looks, and that's going to normalize. And I think when you look at, soft tissue, hamstring injuries, and stuff that'll affect the 3-point shot, like that's a pretty logical explanation for why good looks aren't going down.
Yeah, definitely. And you got to be who you are as a team still, I think. Like I'm surprised this was the best defense by and far last year. And they're not quite up at that level this year so far, which I found a little curious. Obviously, injuries and all that play a part there too.
Yeah.
But I think that's what this group has to lean into. You mentioned the double bigs. You defended that, Justin. I think that's fair too. That's who you are. You know, there might be some spacing and offensive issues that stem from playing that way, but that's this team's strength, and that's what they're going to have to be. And you hope that the additions and the Struces and the Niangs and those guys of the world enhance this roster enough once everybody's back to take them to another level here and get into round 2, round 3 of the playoffs potentially here. I still like this group. I definitely think it's not a team that's ever really going to be among the best offenses in the league, which is tough today. And I'm a defensive guy too. I love defense, love the Celtics defensive identity 2 years ago when they made the finals. But you start to see that they had offensive issues they had to sort out to help them reach their potential, and this new coach has helped do that. So that's going to be the balance the Cavs strike into the future here is you got this defensive roster right now, and it's really good. But is this an offensive league where the best offenses are always going to prevail in those spots?
You know, it's hard to, I don't know. You know, one thing I will slightly push back on is it still a defensive roster? You know, I mean, if you look at the guys that start and finish their day on defense, you know, there's Jarrett, there's Evan, there's Okoro. Everyone else that plays for this team is, you know, I would say, you know, Wade, I would say also is a defensive player more than an offensive player. But, you know, everyone else is pretty much, you know, kind of known for the offensive end of the ball. And I do kind of feel like it, you know, it's kind of the way I wanted to see it go in terms of, you know, if you're going to have this two non-shooting big lineup that you're going to depend on for, you know, playmaking and vertical rim pressure, but not shooting, then everyone else better be pretty shooty. And everyone else should be able to juice your offense. And I think one of the biggest disappointments of the year is the fact that whether it be due to health, whether it be due to poor 3-point shooting variance, whether it be due to, you know, not enough time together or chemistry or whatever it may be, the offense isn't better, you know? And like, I just haven't quite figured out how much I should care about that yet. You know, it's still so, you know, I know the season isn't that young anymore. We're past the first quarter, but like 22nd, you know, being 12 spots lower on the half court offensive rankings when you're swapping out Lamar Stevens and Jetty Osman and Isaac Okoro heavy minutes for mostly Max Strus and George Niang heavy minutes. You know, you would just kind of expect that to at work, even with a little bit of, you know, fallback or a little bit of bad injury, like you would kind of expect that to hold steady, not fall back. So like, I don't know, my logical brain is kind of competing with, you know, kind of the results I'm seeing on the floor because I just don't feel like they're aligning right now.
And I think to Bobby's point, I think your conclusion's correct where the offense is going to need to be better. Like, I think it's going to need to come together. I think Carter's correct that on paper it should, but you're correct that at the end of the day that like it's a results oriented business, right? Like the Cavs were 7th offensively last year, and their starting lineup of Garland, Mitchell, Okoro, Mobley, and Allen had a 122 offensive rating. That would be the best offense in NBA history and would be the top offense in the league this year, last year. Swapping Max Strus for Isaac Okoro shouldn't make that worse offensively. And I think it really does come down to the guards, and they're going to need to put it together. Like eventually this is going to need to normalize. It's like strength of schedule is obviously a factor. Like when you look at that, the Cavs are 3rd defensively, 19th offensively. Like 19th isn't good enough. Like it is going to need to come together at some point. And it's just frustrating that there hasn't been the appropriate kind of run with this group. Carter, I sprung this stat on Bobby. I want to see if you can guess it. So the second most used 5-man combination for the Cavs has played 42 minutes together. Would you guess how many games that's happened in? How many games has the second most used 5-man group for the Cavs played together this season?
We're 24 games into the year.
We're 24 games into the year.
11.
They've played 3.
Oh, come on.
The second most used
Come
lineup
on.
has played 3 games together. So like,
no, it makes sense. 42 minutes. Yeah.
and like whether you define this as excuses or context probably comes down to how fed up you are and how frustrated you are. But like it matters. Like all of this does matter, but it matters in terms of how much we weigh the analysis, but it doesn't matter in the end result. And the end result is what the Cavs are going to be measured against. And, you know, we've seen teams have these uneven starts to the year where they're changing stylistically. The Cavs are up to 17th in pace. They're way up there in terms of transition frequency. Those are great indicators. We're starting to see them take more threes. And maybe, you know, there's some uneven aspects of that. Maybe it ends up feeling like Boston 2 years ago where, you know, they're 500 for the first large portion of the year under Ime, and then it all comes together and they have that run in the second half. The results are going to need to happen at some point for the Cavs because this is such an important year from an evaluation standpoint. So I think the context really matters when you talk about how much weight you attribute to the stats, but we're going to be measured by how far this team gets and how high those peaks are. And to me, that's the most important thing. And hopefully we're stepping in the right direction because I truly do feel at this point that we are trending in the direction and the signs are there. But now they just got to stay healthy enough for that regression to actually come.
Sure, but even just playing the right way, I think means a lot. And I don't think that this is a team that early in the season was always playing the right way, even when they were banged up. I think there were some lapses and some lack of execution or lack of focus or lack of togetherness. And like, you know, I had people in my mentions last night, as I always do whenever I try to contextualize a loss, saying no moral victories. But like, listen, you know, there's just no shame in a tight loss against this Boston team that probably should be the title favorite. I don't know if they are right now, but if they're not, they're right up there.
They should be. And for the Cavs, you almost want to take on that Miami mindset. And Justin's tossed that comparison around a little bit tonight in a bunch of different ways where they might not have the best regular season this year. And that's going to be disappointing. And everyone will start freaking out. But if you do get into the playoffs, whether it's a play-in series or first round series as a road team, and you knock off a favorite in that series, which this team could potentially do. I mean, other than Boston, as long as you're not the 8th seed, there's no insurmountable opponent in the East playoff field here. Like the Cavs should be able to go into a 2-7, a 3-6, a 4-5, and win pretty much any series if they're at full strength here. So as Carter said, it's about playing the right way. I thought they looked like they were a pretty sound two-way team last night in terms of what they did on both ends there. And starting to get a little healthier with LeVert back and hopefully Mobley soon here. So I don't think it's panic time by any means with this group. The unfortunate part is that there is such a microscope on this season, and the results are going to determine so much of what comes next for this group that's still relatively young in Mobley's case and a few of the other guys, and hasn't really played for such a long time together. Because if you're looking at the sample so far, you know this was an amazing regular season team a year ago, but they were a disappointing playoff team. So we know that they're not this much worse than last regular season, but how much is that playoff result indication of who they are? That's tough to say too, because it's just one opponent over 5-6 games or however long that series went.
Yeah, again, and
who could say 5-6? Maybe it went 7.
Yeah, maybe. You know, I think if you're frustrated with this season, I think in part it is just due to the fact
500 is very frustrating. It can be because you're up and down, up and down, up and down.
And they just haven't properly, you know, I think we are all expecting like, you know, some mouthwash after to start the year to wash away that bad taste in your mouth from a playoff loss. And instead it's just been kind of like, it's not like your breath's gotten any worse, but it ain't getting better. You know, you still got that funk that you just want to wash out with like an 8-game win streak or something like really, you know, like put your foot down and take over, you know, for a stretch of the year.
Milwaukee and Boston, like they major changes. They don't have the continuity. Like the Cavs have the continuity. They'll get off to the hot start. Hasn't happened, right? Like it
reinforcements
sucks.
too. Yeah.
Yeah. Like it sucks. Like, and I know that's like part of it for me. Like I think one of the things I love with this podcast is we get to kind of just be honest and, approach this from a fan perspective. And one of the things that I wrestle with personally too is like, this is the first like non-linear year for the Cavs from like a team development standpoint. Like even looking back at like the past 2 times when this was a playoff team, like it was very linear with LeBron. He continuously got better. He got you to the finals. And then, you had a couple of years of him being a contender. Then he left for Miami. Then you get together like a group of players and all of a sudden LeBron comes back, automatically you're a contender. This has been pretty normal. They consistently get better. You go from 19 wins, you get to 44 and make the play-in, then you get to 51. And it's not abnormal for you to have a weird stretch like this where the growth isn't necessarily linear. You're changing up the style and it goes a little bit sideways. But when you do have a lot of pressure on you, when you have the internal expectations are really high, when you're trying to, assess the fit of Donovan Mitchell with this roster and convince him that this is the right spot. Like all of those factors, like it just leads to some uneasiness, and it's totally natural. But in the moment, it's tough to process. It's tough to remember that this is normal.
They also chose this too. So, if you get to the end of this year and it's like, oh, injuries this year and that weird playoff 2 years ago, well, you went out and got Mitchell, you traded all those picks, and you accelerated the timeline. And that's what comes with it. If you are going to go with a little bit more of a short-term view, you could have kept marketing, you could have kept drafting, you could have done it the slow way. So that's the balance they struck with making a move like that. And then if, Mitchell wants to move on after this year, it'll be another pivot. So... It's
frankly,
tough.
I think it's the right move. Like I think high leverage minutes this early in the careers of guys like Garland and Mobley, like learning how to develop as a player individually within the team context with expectations, with a microscope. Like I think that's really, really good. And like
Mobley's in a tough spot. He really is.
Dude, like Boston's a great example of this. Tatum and Brown were so good that they made the all-in move for Kyrie.
Yeah.
That didn't work out. So they pivoted to Kemba. Then they pivoted again, right? Like they've made several pivots since then, but they understood the value of being competitive and trying to, reach those heights early on. They didn't rush the timeline and hurt the development of Tatum and Brown. They were aggressive and assertive and gave those guys high leverage minutes. And I think it pays off dividends. I think that's part of why Boston is as good as they are today. And I think that's the same thing with the Cavs. If they need to make pivots, they can. But you're talking about, when you're looking at your core guys like Garland and Mobley, 23 and 22 years old, like there's a big run ahead of them. And I think when you look at from the perspective of Donovan Mitchell, these are guys that you fit really well alongside that still have a lot of room to growth and a lot of internal growth ahead of them.
And one thing, and if I can add in, because like part of the reason Boston looks so smart for doing what they did, by going from Kyrie and then trying to pivot and work and keep working the roster up and getting back to this roster that they have now, which you've just called the most talented you've ever seen, which is bananas because you're not
after 3 all-in moves.
Yeah, because you're not like a 12-year-old here. You've seen some really good Boston teams in your day, but the reason it looks good is because Tatum and Brown were worth continuing to tinker around and build around. And those guys had the level of investment to stick around and not try to and keep the faith, even when there were some bad vibe seasons along the road. Like if the Cavs are having a bad vibe season, like that would not be unique to teams like Boston on the road here. But the reason it worked is because those guys kept getting better. They kept proving that they were good enough. And if the Cavs keep trying this experiment and it turns out Mobley and Garland just aren't good enough, then what were you gonna, welcome to the NBA, like not it's not always going to work out.
Explored that option.
Yeah. You've at least thoroughly explored it. You tried it every way you could. And like ultimately that's what every team is doing, is deciding whether their young core is someone they really want to keep building around and working towards, or they want to start over and try again with a different combination. And Boston.
Good news is I think they're awesome.
Yeah, I think they're awesome. And I think
obvious,
Boston.
Right?
But like there were a lot of times where Boston was like, "Are these guys so awesome that we should keep trying?" And they just they put their heads together. They decided, yes, they are indeed so awesome. We should keep trying, and it's paid dividends.
It's a great comparison because they might not be Brown and Tatum, but they're two high-level picks that are hits. You know that they're good players. They're two of the best players in the league at this point already at their young ages. So that alone is a reason to continue investing and tinkering with that group, even through some low stages. I think that's a great point. And, if Mitchell doesn't stick on there, maybe he turns into some other picks. Maybe he turns into some other great players that fit around those two as they continue to get better and better. So it's definitely worth seeing out. There's no doubt about it. And all the teams that have been there at the end, I'm trying to think now, like the Bucks in 21 and the Warriors in 22 and that late incarnation of their team, they're all built around those staple guys that you draft and are your guys. And those guys are usually hold on to because of the contracts and how they work, but also this just being their thing. Like they're going to see the Cavs as their team for a long time, whether Mitchell's there or not. So that helps. Like Brown and Tatum, there's a lot of things to love about them, but I think the one thing you love about them above all else is, other than like some Brown, complaining last year that I think was probably more contract motivated than anything else, they both have been very comfortable in Boston. Like there's never been any like, oh man, Tatum might look out west this year, or Brown's starting to say I want my own team. Like they've just been both very comfortable working through the ups and downs here, and hopefully that's the case for Garland and Mobley as well.
Yeah, I think just how naturally they fit together and how well they accentuate one another is a great thing. And this is why it's helpful to have people that follow the league closely and follow other teams on the podcast, where you see these parallels and you get the context and you remember all these things. Carter, is funny when I was on the Garden Report earlier and you see the comments and people are mad about timeouts and like adjustments and the rotation. Like no fan base is ever happy with that stuff, and it's just the easiest things to pick nits with. But when I look at this Cavs upcoming schedule, like I hope they can steal this one against Boston on Thursday. That would obviously be great. But after that, it eases up a lot. Like even these next two games after that, it's Atlanta and Houston. Both of those games, the Cavs are at a huge rest advantage where those teams are going to be on.
Houston's a different kind of team this year, just like we talked about the Magic.
Kind of team. They are a different kind of team, but it's going to be their third game in 4 nights, second night of a back-to-back, road back-to-back. Like the Cavs have back-to-back situations like that where they're at home. And I think if there's going to be a run, it's going to be this next kind of 12 to 15 games here. I think the schedule lightens up a whole lot. And if the Cavs continue this process that we've seen lately, I think that this is when it's going to start to turn, assuming that the health is there.
Yeah, before we wrap, I did want to just get kind of one final previewy kind of question out there, because obviously, the Cavs are, if they can steal a road win in Boston, they'd have wins on the road in Boston, Philly, and Miami to start the year, which is nothing to shake a stick at, and they haven't played Milwaukee.
You'd be the first to win in Boston, right?
Yeah, and they haven't beaten Milwaukee yet. So, like, I guess my question to you guys is, let's assume Jalen is out, just because it does seem like he did seem to turn that ankle, and why would they risk it with Cavs shorthanded? What are you looking at? What are you looking to see differently in this one? What's the most interesting kind of part two matchup for going both ways? Because there's so little game planning that gets to be done in the NBA, and this one, this is one of those rare opportunities.
Turn up the heat. You turn up the heat. I'm always surprised, and I didn't get a close rewatch in, but I'm always surprised when teams don't throw doubles at Tatum, like blitz the pick and roll, throw some pressure at this team's ball handlers. Because one thing they haven't done overall well this year is protect the ball. They'll turn over a lot. And I think, they had double-digit turnovers again in this game here, but it didn't feel like there was a lot of pressure at the point of attack on Tatum and Brown to get off the ball. And if Brown's out in this game, it'll probably be Horford stepping in. So that's another guy who's not quite going to kill you if the ball funnels his way away from Tatum. So I always am surprised when teams don't get aggressive in terms of knocking Tatum off the ball and making him pass, because you want him being more of a passive facilitator than an aggressive downhill scorer and shooter. And I know he missed a lot of threes in this game too, but he was super aggressive. And there really wasn't a lot that Cleveland did on the perimeter that forced him to not do that. So I think there can be some more aggressiveness on Cleveland's part in terms of disrupting what Boston wants to do offensively here. But part of it's executing offensively too. Like, you got to keep them out of transition. The mismatches, as Carter talked about, in transition are just devastating when Celtics get into those. So those are the big ones right there. But it's going to be a different game if Brown's out. That double big lineup, Boston's more defensive than offensive in that look, I feel like. They got to go another guy down in their depth, and they really haven't found like that 8th, 9th guy to be consistent yet.
Lamar Stevens game is incoming.
I was asking Justin earlier, Carter, why no Stevens? Everyone in Boston's wondering it to start this year.
Welcome to the story of Lamar Stevens, where
every fan base loves him.
fan base just falls in love with him as their "why isn't he getting in there? He'll change the energy of the game" guy. So welcome to the Lamar Stevens experience.
I love Lamar Stevens.
Yeah,
he's the best. He's a great story. And for me, what I want to see, to keep it short, is just to see what Boston does defensively and how the Cavs attack it. Like, to me, that's the most interesting thing. Do they stick with the drop? If they are going double big, do they change how they're guarding Garland and Mitchell? Like, they do have the best defensive backcourt in the league, probably, with Boston, but the Cavs were able to get their guards going. So to see what Boston does to counter that, and how the Cavs have prepared, anticipating that counter, and how they attack the counter and counter that counter, like that's the kind of stuff that I find really interesting.
Yeah, I remain pretty fascinated with Boston's deep depth. And like, if Brown doesn't play,
wants to see more Cornet.
I'm just curious to see if, like, how reliable, Hauser is when he has to go to 25 from 20. Pritchard has to go from 12 to 20. Like, when you can't sit them if they're not having a nice game. If when you're down one or two guys in the rotation, I really do feel, all respect to Hauser, who's had a nice year, and Pritchard, who's been way better than I thought. So I might just have to hold an L here, but I have consistently felt that this is a 6 deep team. This is a 6 deep Celtics team that those 6 are better than anyone else's 6, but their 7, 8, 9 is probably at the bottom tier of most contenders' 7, 8, 9s. And
Hauser might be separating himself there, though. I mean,
I just might be wrong. Like, that's the thing.
Yeah,
he's wrong a lot. Trust me, Bobby. He's wrong a lot.
Screw off. So I'm interested to see how the Celtics depth holds up, and if they have a little less optionality, they can just beat the crap out of the Cavs. When they're down a man, and maybe they lose a little lineup flexibility that they have with when they're fully healthy. And then on the other end, I think Justin's spot on. I feel like the Cavs caught Boston napping in that first quarter. Like, Boston was not ready for the sharpness with which the Cavs were executing, and if are the Cavs going to be able to score consistently if Boston's a little more ready, playing a little bit bigger? Does it get gunky like it did in that fourth quarter where the Cavs only scored 21? Because I feel like this is the kind of matchup where if Boston goes up 10 early, I'm not sure the Cavs are climbing their way back.
Yeah, I totally agree. Anyways, Bobby, thank you so much for joining us. I thought this was a really, really interesting episode, and got to talk through a lot of things that I've kind of been mulling over. Before we wrap this thing up, anything you want to promote or plug for our audience?
Yeah, definitely. CLNSmedia.com for all our Celtics coverage. Proud of the work we're doing over there at a smaller outlet, competing with the big guys out there. And Garden Report after every game we're live, so go check that out after the next game. And Boston Sports Journal every week as well, .com with a column over there. So
you are grinding, my friend. You are absolutely grinding. I can't imagine going live post game every game and doing the extensive coverage you guys do. So you always enjoy having you on. Always enjoy your perspective. We know that you put in the work. You do the analysis, and that's why we really value your opinion. So big thanks for you for coming on. Big thanks to our audience for tuning in live. Make sure you like and subscribe. Click the notification bell so you know when we're going live. If you're listening via podcast and you want to support us, leave us a rating, leave a review, subscribe, unsubscribe, resubscribe, and help cook those books. If you want to be part of Chase Down's exclusive Discord chat, send a screenshot of that review to chasedownpod@gmail.com. However you choose to support us, we really do appreciate it. Make sure you guys are staying safe out there. Until next time, go Cavs.